Okay, good afternoon, Chair, board members, Chief Operating Officer, staff, and members of the public. As usual, please silence your cell phones and electronic devices and mute your microphones, etc., in order to minimize background interference and, of course, as a courtesy to your colleagues. This is a remote meeting. We'll take, as we always do, a roll call. Chair.
Present.
Vice Chair Gonzalez.
Present.
Member Adams, I note for the record, is absent. Member Austin.
Present.
Member Gavin.
Present. Member
Wolf.
Present.
Member Wolf, yes, thank you.
Present.
And COO Sherrod.
Present.
Thank you so much. Chair, there are no members of the public who registered as required in order to provide comments. As such, we will proceed with the regular calendar. Chair, before we proceed to the two reports on this calendar, would you like to provide any comments?
I just want to thank the board members for doing two today. I realize it's difficult, but we really are moving, especially on the transformation plan. And I'd like to keep the board apprised of some of the changes either in the works, proposed, completed, piloted, and so forth, because I think all of us know that it's been really difficult. It's difficult enough to try to raise the capital funding, and it's also difficult to change the organization. And I think over time, these organizational changes are a way of preparing NYCHA to receive the capital once we get that funding in place and be able to manage much better than where we are now. The other thing I like to do is, just because we went into this budget season with a really tough budget, Anika is going to just give an update so the board's aware of where we are with the budget. I plan on doing this again probably in the middle of the year, after the second quarter. And I don't want anybody among us to be surprised on any choices we might have to make if if we have a deficit or can't close a deficit. And I don't want to do anything in the sense that there's some kind of panic about it. We're not panicked. We're just trying to figure out how to move the pieces around to make this work for us when we've had such a hit with the rent collection. That really has thrown off the day-to-day operating budget pretty significantly. And Anika can talk a little bit about that. But we'll have more of these briefings, I think, just to get you familiar with some of this. I'm also open to doing this a different way. If board members want to do anything individually at any time, we can accommodate that, because we're really getting down to the property level. We're starting to make those changes. We're starting to put in place, I hope, a bunch of things that will give the properties more autonomy and control, but at the same time, more resources and skills. So with that, I'm just going to say thanks again for doubling up today, and we'll go into the reports.
Terrific. Thank you, Chair. We'll begin with 2022 budget update. Anika Lescott, CFO. Anika.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to see you all again today. And Greg, thank you for setting the stage for this very important conversation. As Greg mentioned, given that we passed a budget in 2022 with a year-end deficit, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping the board fully apprised as we go throughout the year, so we can let you know our progress with our revenues and our expenses and where we think we will end up by year end. Our goal is, of course, to balance. And so we want to make sure that we are keeping you abreast. So Mariella, if you could go to the first slide. Thank you. So just as a reminder, this was the budget that we passed. This is the board adopted budget for 2022, which was adopted on December 29th of 2021. As noted, it projects a $35 million year-end deficit. So that is, if everything stays the way it is on the sheet, that's what we would expect on December 31st of the year. There are some key pieces here, just as a reminder. The first is we are anticipating needing to take 100 million out of our unrestricted operating reserves and use 80 million in our restricted PAC proceeds to be able to afford many of the transformation plan and HUD agreement compliance investments that we're making. In addition, the budget also requires HUD approval of a $53 million rate reduction incentive utility waiver. So that's that highlighted line. And what's critical about that is essentially we've submitted a waiver to HUD asking that we keep 100% of all the savings that we're garnering on our utilities. The way the formula currently works is that if you reduce your costs, you don't get to keep those costs. HUD reduces your subsidy, and we want to be able to keep, 100% of those energy savings so that we can apply it to our budget. Next slide. So just a few updates. First, HUD has indicated informally that they will not approve the $53 million utility savings measure. So we expect that that will have an impact, a reduction of $53 million, funds that we will have to make up through other means. On the federal side, Congress has passed a 2022 omnibus appropriations bill. So this is their funding bill for all of the government. And through that, they have, as Greg mentioned in the first meeting, provided some small inflationary adjustments to the public housing programs, not huge increases as we were seeing in some of the previous bills or even in Build Back Better. So there isn't a significant additional investment, but it's still positive. We are expecting that we will receive $35 million more in operating funds than we budgeted. So that impact is, plus 35. On the state side, to date, NYCHA has submitted 110 million to the state EVAP program for 29,000 households. So this is to cover, 12 months of arrears for those households. Unfortunately, we have not received any EVAP funds, but we are continuing to advocate for that funding on the state level. There have been some really positive conversations where various members and legislative have indicated that they want to fund NYCHA on both operating and capital. So we remain really hopeful that we will get some additional funding from the state, but as of right now, the impact of that is to be determined. And on the city side, as you may be aware, the city had a savings measure across all the agencies. It's affectionately known as a PEG program to eliminate the gap. Through that, NYCHA was included, and it decreased our expense and operating funding by 31 million over 5 years. We do think that this reduction is manageable. The reduction was taken out of one program, so that is helpful. And it's on a reimbursement basis. So, essentially what we would do is sort of scale back our efforts in that program, and we can manage that reduction of 31 million over the 5-year span. Next slide. I also wanted to take some time to talk about all the other work that we do in finance. We are managing the property-based budgeting workstream under the transformation plan. And part of that work has been supporting our property managers to make sure that they have the tools, the information, the skills that they need to be able to manage the properties and make more local decisions. So you've heard me talk before about all the training we've been doing with the property managers. We're continuing that again this year. You've heard me talk before about the way that they were encouraged to each include their budget request for 2022. All of those were funded. And one of the things that we've been noticing is our reports. Are they the best set of data? Are they presented in the best way that these property managers can use them and start to make some progress and change? One of the areas we saw was overtime. It's come up at NYCHA over the past, 6 months or so. where we have been doing various investigations into overtime. As you know, we've had to use overtime more to manage some of our workload. And so with that, we are rolling out 2 new overtime reports for our property managers beginning on April 1st, 2022. So that's in just about a week. The reports are actually already up, but my team is doing some quality assurance to check all the links and make sure that the data is being pulled accurately. But big picture, these new reports will allow the properties to monitor individual overtime earners and all overtime performed at the property level. It will be updated on a bi-weekly basis, consistent with the NYCHA payroll. And I wanted to show you here actually a copy of one such report that was pulled from our system just, I think, a few weeks ago when we were testing. So this is what it will look like for all the property managers. This is one of the reports. It's called Overtime Earners. We've blacked out the personal identifying information. We didn't want to call out any staff members here. But essentially you see columns for employee name, title, their location, their salary, the current scheduled and unscheduled overtime. So what they've done just in that one pay period. But the next section also shows you year to date, how much overtime has that individual been performing at the property. And it also gives you a sense of the percentage. So what's the percent of overtime that they're doing of their salary? So a property manager could easily spot in this case where there was overtime that might be above what is a reasonable threshold. And they could do some more work to make sure that overtime is spread amongst employees and individuals, and make sure that the overtime being performed is being done so with our residents and their needs in mind. Next slide. So the second overtime report is overtime by title and code. This one is a bit heftier. So the top box shows you the total overtime performed by each position in dollar terms. So it'll tell you for caretakers, here's all the total overtime your caretakers are doing, your maintenance workers, your building supervisors, et cetera, et cetera. And the bottom actually shows you the overtime code for that same pay period. So, these folks performed, let's say, $100,000 of overtime that pay period. What is it being used for? Is that consistent with the needs of the property? Is that consistent with the needs of the residents? And so we think that as we roll these reports out in April, we're going to be working with operations and with quality assurance. We'll be training our property managers in the coming months to make sure they know how to access the reports, how to use them, and that they really understand the data that's being provided, so that we can all make changes to better, maintain and operate our buildings. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, Victor Gonzalez. So
Good afternoon, board member.
good afternoon. So I want to go back to the first slide.
Absolutely.
And this is just a question just for my understanding. So in the source, the very first level is the tenant rental revenue,
Correct.
right? Which is 867, whatever that number is.
Million, yes.
Million. So my question is, as opposed to what? In other words, what number would be good in that position, being that we're having troubles with that particular issue?
That is a really great question, and I'm happy that you raised it. So generally speaking, in years past, NYCHA has collected $1 billion to $1.1 billion in rent. So this number here is our projection, and I'm including something like a 10%, 12% collection loss, depending on the unit and the developments. So what you'd want to see here is a number that's $1 billion and upward. And given our trouble with COVID and the pandemic and our rent collection, we are not anticipating that we'd be able to meet that. So from the HUD perspective, HUD is expecting that we are going to collect all of the rent that we charged, 100%. But we know from a budgeting perspective, based on what we've seen in the past 2 years, that's not reasonable. So we are making sure that when we pass a budget, we're including something that we could actually meet. So thank you for that question. It's really great.
I wanted to make sure that I understood it as well. Would you, for this layman, would you speak or give me a couple of points as to what the ERAP program is
Absolutely. So the ERAP program, ERAP stands for Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It is a program that is funded by the federal government, by the Department of Treasury, and the funds are then given to each state to distribute. In that program, it essentially helps tenants who are behind on their rent. So a tenant, a household would go in and you would apply. Because NYCHA is a large PHA, we have made it so that we could also help and apply on behalf of our tenants with their consent. And so through that program, there's sort of a window of time that you can submit the arrears. And you say, okay, this particular tenant, Jane Doe, has, you know, $1,000 in arrears over this 12-month period for which they're eligible. And the state then makes determinations around providing those funds to the tenant. In the case of NYCHA, they would provide it directly to NYCHA to put a credit to the resident's bill. Unfortunately, there are also priorities. So the state has prioritized, groups of residents, and unfortunately, federally subsidized residents like NYCHA tenants are last in that priority list. So the state has indicated in some sort of public forums that they have already obligated all of the money that was given to New York State. And, NYCHA has not yet received any of that money. We also know, though, that state legislators are, exploring different options to be able to provide, more funds for ERAP or just perhaps more funds for tenant arrears in the state. So we're really hopeful, and we are, keeping our ears to the ground and following that legislation heavily.
So
Anika, could
then-
I add something?
Please do, Greg.
I'm sorry, Victor. The ERAP is important for another reason, and that is when Congress passed the law, they made the credit for the rent non-taxable. It can't be considered a gift or can't be considered any kind of windfall or anything like that. And that's one of the reasons we wanted the ERAP money, because in the accounts that we submitted, we think we have a number of people, if they got ERAP reimbursement, without that, they could have a tax problem, with the IRS. So ERAP provided for that at the federal level and made the payment of the rent a tax exempt event. So there's no reason to be concerned about it. The state has talked about doing something separately for NYCHA, and I should point out that we're not the only housing authority experiencing this. This is not only here, we have the biggest numbers, but I've talked to other housing authorities as well, including the upstate ones that have had similar issues. But we're concerned that if there is a separate bill, you could eliminate a state income tax impact, but you couldn't eliminate the federal one. So we're debating, and I'm hopeful we get some money, but that's kind of where we stand.
Okay.
Can I follow
So
up
then-
if Victor's done? I'm not sure it's complete.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not done yet. I just have a follow-up question then. So then I can assume that because we haven't received any ERAP program, that number at the tenant rental revenue is accurate and up to date. Now, as soon as we receive any ERAP money, that number should change, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
So that is our best projection for what we will expect to collect for the full 12 months of the year. If we get ERAP money, you'll see a direct correlation there on that line. That number will go right up.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
Paula.
much.
Paula?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we
so,
can.
First of all, Anika, I so agree with you forecasting at the reality level. So my question, which I don't want to be considered naive on this, but I want to ask it, and that is that the city has received COVID funds. And so my question is, isn't there maybe an angle with the city to access some COVID funds for this?
That's a great question. I think it is certainly worth exploring again with our city partners on the COVID front. We received our own COVID money from FEMA Federal Emergency Management Agency back in 2021 for expenses in 2020. So the federal government still has not provided any funds for us for all of our costs last year, in layman's terms. So I'm certainly happy to have another conversation with our city partners to see if there's any way that we can be included in some of the work that they are doing. We also continue to work with FEMA to raise the flag and continue to request additional funding for the costs that we've incurred during COVID. So I don't think your question's naive at all. I think it's a great point. And given our budget situation, you can be assured that we will go after every dollar possible.
Well, and it sounds like there is an opportunity with FEMA for 2021.
Correct.
Okay, so that's another opportunity. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, if there are no further questions for Anika, thank you very much.
Thank you. I saw previously that member Wolf had her hand up. I'm not sure if we addressed your question previously.
Greg largely did. I was just wondering what the state of play was with state legislators in particular in terms of them championing NYCHA's priorities insofar as ERAP or other things.
Yeah, Emma, these are really active discussions. I can't tell you that we know what might wind up in the budget or not. I also want to point out that
sorry, Greg, but they are priorities for the Senate and the House and the Assembly.
Okay. Yeah. Now the best information we have is that folks were thinking of if New York may have picked up a little bit more money in the redistribution of ERAP, then NYCHA could go to the front of that line. That was one idea. And that would require legislation. The second idea we heard was there would be a separate line appropriated of state money that would go. That would be great, but it does come with the caveat on the taxes. The third interesting thing, which I'm not sure where this is going, is we received an inquiry from HUD indicating that Treasury had asked them to provide information, not just for New York, but other states as well, on how much the ERAP funding has reached to the public housing program. And I think that's interesting because if HUD is not budgeted to compensate for the loss of the rent in the budget that we have, and I don't know if the feds are thinking about anything helpful at that level, where maybe, we did get a little bump in the operating subsidy formula, I think last year. Yeah, but clearly folks are watching to see how much of this is really coming to the most vulnerable, because we have some of the lowest incomes in the city, obviously. So it's unclear if there might be further federal direction on this as well. We just can't tell.
And Greg, you make a really great point when you talk about the bump ups that we've gotten. So essentially in 2020 and 2021, through different mechanisms, we've received additional federal support to be able to shoulder some of the burdens. So in 2020, it was the CARES Act funding. In 2021, HUD gave us a little bit of a bump up in recognition that PHAs nationwide were not collecting the rent. And 2022 is really the first year where we haven't received anything yet to sort of help us. And so we continue to remain hopeful that they will do that again, but it's essentially the first year that we NYCHA have to deal with this all on our own without additional federal support to compensate for the trends that we are seeing.
Thanks a lot. Very helpful.
Okay, terrific. There are no further comments or questions. Thank you, Anika. We'll move on to report number 2, a transformation plan update, and it will be co-presented by Eva Trimble, the EVP of Strategy and Innovation, Arvind Sohoni, the Vice President, and Kyle Slug, Senior Program Manager. Eva?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Greg mentioned earlier, there's a lot going on with our transformation plan efforts. We are in full implementation mode on various projects. And so we want to make sure that as the board, you are fully up to speed and in the loop on these initiatives. And so I'll kick it off and then hand it off to my colleagues. Next slide. So for today, we're going to give a high-level update on the organizational plan, as well as the implementation schedule and milestones. And we're going to do 2 project deep dives. I think you've heard some of these projects before, but since they are the 2 biggest operational changes that we're implementing, we want to keep you updated as we move along. So property-based caretaker schedules and work order reform. And then we're happy to take Q&A as we go through it or at the very end. So with that, I will hand it off to Arvind.
Perfect. Thanks, Eva. I'm Arvind Sahoni, Vice President of Strategy and Operations. And I'm going to start with a little bit of context on where we are in this sort of long journey. So as you all know, the HUD agreement in 2019 required an organizational plan, very loosely defined. We started our resident, staff, and partner engagement in late 2019 into 2020. And all of that work led to the transformation plan, which we released in March of 2021. And so the transformation is the vision of the agency's future. It defines who we're trying to be and why we're trying to change. And it also identifies 40 individual programs that are sort of built into this overall bouquet of change. The transformation plan alone was not enough to satisfy the terms of the agreement on the organizational plan requirement. So we agreed to create 2 subsequent implementation plans that would detail how we're actually going to make these different things happen along the way. The first plan, which we worked on throughout all of last year with our federal partners, includes specific steps we're taking to implement some of these programs. You're going to hear, obviously, as you mentioned, a lot about 2 of them in a second. The first plan focuses on the neighborhood model, work order reform, and site-based janitorial schedules. These were also the things that were most frequently cited by residents in the early engagement sessions as problems. And so we front-loaded the work on those resident-facing changes as part of the implementation too. This first implementation plan also includes summaries of other activities that are ongoing, but it really does focus on these 3 pieces. It has a lot of detail on those. Unlike the transformation, these implementation plans do not include sort of whole new ideas. They're simply technical documents that add detail to the programs we've already committed to. So nothing's new out of sort of whole cloth here. This is all about adding details to things that were in the transformation plan. And the content for these implementation plans comes from a set of working groups that are all tasked to drive the programs, working groups that are a mix of staff and residents both. There's a second implementation plan coming, which will be led by our federal oversight partners. We're still in the early stages of discussing how this is going to work, what the scope of that will be. And we'll certainly update you as we know more about what that's going to look like and how it's going to work. Combined, these 3 plans together, which we're hoping, by the end of this year, we'll have all 3 done, constitute the organizational plan and the agreement, satisfying paragraph 46. So once the 3rd one is done, then we can say the organizational plan has been achieved from the agreement's terms, but obviously a lot of work to do to actually make the changes happen after that.
And Arvind, before you go on, I just wanted to point out that I believe Mariella shared the implementation plan phase 1 with all of you last night, or it should be in your SharePoint folder. And if you take a look through it and have any questions, you can definitely reach out to either Arvind or myself on it.
Perfect. Thanks, Eva. Let's go to the next slide here. So as I mentioned, each of the programs in the transformation has a working group that's a mix of staff and residents working together to solve problems, build schedules, figure out how do we actually make these changes happen on the ground. The working groups are developing milestones that we can track against and report on so everyone can see our progress and see where we are against them. Oversight of these programs from a central level is led by a new program management office led by Daniel Townsend. I'm not going to read off each individual step because there's a lot of them obviously here. We wanted to ensure that you had the full list for reference. So you can sort of track our progress too, and we'll continue to give you the updates as we make changes to the dates. And hopefully you'll sort of see some of these things being ticked off as we go. This first page focuses on a set of resident-facing changes. So the neighborhood model, closing work tickets, work order reform, caretaker schedules, resident roundtable, all things that residents will hopefully notice in the next handful of months as changes on the ground. Let's go to the next slide. The second page has a set of changes that are focused on procurement. Obviously, Sergio and his team have done a great job in transforming that function. And so this is sort of a lot of the work that they're doing to fix the needs in the procurement side, which obviously all feed into our on-site operations too. Let's go to the next slide. This third page has a handful of HR and finance programs. It also includes, so I think we may have, sorry, I think I got them flipped. So this is actually a set of IT and information system upgrades. So again, things that are sort of on the back end that will flow through to help us on the development side. Let's go to the next one. And then lastly, we've got a set of HR and finance programs that are also underway. Anika mentioned the property-based budgeting at the bottom of this page. And again, all of these things, which sound like back-end changes, really are essential to getting the on-the-ground changes to stick. We need all of these things to work in parallel to have those on-the-ground changes make sense. You'll see that these milestones run out to the end of the year, and we'll continue to update the progress and also the dates as we have changes to them. Let's go to the next slide. And then the last set here is we've got a handful of things on asset information, KPIs, sort of the data piece of things. How do we produce data, use data? And again, how do we make better decisions with the information that we have? Critically important to making good choices on site and also in central office too. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to hand it over to Kyle so I can talk about caretaker scheduling at the end and the end of AWS. But before Kyle starts, I want to sort of emphasize the moment that we're in right now is that, as you'll see with Kyle's details and when Eva talks about work order reform, we're now moving past the talking phase of this work and into the actual doing phase of the work. These are changes that are actually underway or happening in the next few months. And I do think that's sort of a moment for us to celebrate, even if briefly, that we're there. This is always sort of a risk of any strategic plan that you never get to this moment. It doesn't mean that things are great, that we fixed everything, but we are at a point now where things are actually happening. And I think you'll see with Kyle's presentation that we think these things will actually make a big difference on the ground. So Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Arvin. Yes, I mean, just to echo what Arvin said, I'm going to walk through really what is an active implementation timeline for a new way of scheduling caretakers and supervisors, really based on the needs of particular developments. And along with that, ending the so-called alternative work schedules, AWS, that I'm sure you have heard many complaints about over the past couple of years. Next slide, please. So before I jump into this, I do want to sort of refresh you all on a little bit of context. I believe that you all have heard that over the past 6 months or so, we've really tested out this program in a smaller form in Brooklyn. So we essentially reverted to how schedules looked prior to AWS and saw some fairly positive results. Fewer reports of common area messes, fewer overtime hours for supervisors, and really a pretty strong positive response from both residents and staff. And so based on that, we are now moving to expand this program, which we're sort of rebranding at this point as property-based scheduling across NYCHA. So the core idea here is that, within certain parameters that we're setting, property managers are now going to be responsible for scheduling their caretakers and their supervisory staffs as is necessary to meet whatever unique needs and challenges they face at their particular site. At the core of the parameters that we're putting in place are some elements of the pilot I just mentioned that seem to have worked particularly effectively. First, and maybe most central, is returning most of the caretakers who are primarily responsible for working in resident buildings. So the day-to-day work of sweeping, mopping, janitorial maintenance, returning them to a schedule that will have them on site at the same time every day of the week. And alongside that, assigning them to particular buildings to really rebuild a sense of ownership that we've seen from many angles was lost in the transition to AWS. Alongside that, we're also keeping some options for tasks like garbage collection in particular that would take place better, either before 8 a.m. or after 4:30 p.m., which is the core of the workday. And in the garbage case, that's to prevent trash from sitting out overnight, from attracting pests, and to really provide within the boundaries that we've established, sort of around the clock service here. Finally, in addition to some of those pilot elements, we're introducing additional flexibility that we hope will help properties provide better service to residents. And maybe most importantly here is shifts for supervisors that will have them on site every day. One of the major issues we've heard with AWS is that since supervisors are only all on site 1 day a week, it's very hard for them to communicate with each other and to share information about what might be going on at various points in a site. So by allowing them to be on site together much of the time, we're not only reducing some of the problems we've seen with coverage, but we're also allowing each supervisor to focus a little more effectively on their core job functions. Next slide, please. So this is really just a high-level overview of the shift options that we're giving. I'm not going to go too in-depth on this, but if there are particular points you have questions about, let me know and I can dive a little deeper. So in essence, we have 3 buckets of shift options that property managers can choose from. So the first is the traditional shift I mentioned. So this is 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Monday through Friday, and the same hours on weekends on sort of a reduced staff level basis. And this is far and away going to be the most common shift that we see across the developments. As I mentioned, all of the in-building caretakers are going to be on this. And as we started to get schedules in from certain boroughs, we've seen that this is a popular option for other staff as well. The second bucket of schedules we have here is what we're referring to as a time-shifted traditional schedule. So that's really just a traditional schedule that starts an hour or so earlier or runs a little bit later, according to what needs to be done. So a popular option we're seeing is bringing a couple of caretakers in at 7 and having them leave at 3:30 to collect garbage before the day starts, for example. The third option here, and this is, I should stress, really by far the rarest set of options that we're seeing being used in reality, is a compressed schedule, similar to what was in effect under AWS. So this would have caretakers in 4 days a week on 10.5-hour shifts. And we've really restricted this to particular titles for particular uses since moving on from AWS. So this would be used mainly for, on the caretaker side, the sort of garbage collection function that I mentioned. And could also be used depending on the desires and needs of the development to provide supervisory coverage, if that's deemed appropriate. We haven't really seen it being used so far, though. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned upfront and sort of implied on the last slide, we are really in the middle of moving from AWS to this new scheduling regime. But I do want to walk through, the process that we're using to actually move developments over. So, as I sort of mentioned up front, the core actors here now are really the property managers, and alongside them, the neighborhood administrators. And so the first step in our process is really for these staff to go out and to talk to both their supervisors on site, their caretakers on site, to figure out, what the concrete needs of their developments are. And also to meet with the site's tenant association president. Oftentimes, as I'm sure you all know, residents have, a particular view of problems that occur on site that staff might often miss. So certain parts of buildings that need to be cleaned at certain parts of the day. And so by building the TA president into this initial formation process, we're trying to bring all of that information from various perspectives to bear when these initial schedules are being created. So once that schedule is proposed, the property manager submits it to DMP, which is really our sort of central processing unit in operations for this scheduling process, where analysts will confirm really whether the schedules that they have submitted conform to the principles that we've laid out. And importantly, at this stage, we are not providing centralized feedback on best practices or what we as central office think that development should be doing. This is really meant to be a process of allowing developments to experiment with what works best for them, and then collecting those learnings a little bit later on, once we've seen each site do what they think they should be doing at the outset. So third, once we confirm that these schedules are all in order, we ship them off to HR, which will enter them into our timekeeping system. And then, 3 weeks after that confirmation, on the first day of the new pay period, the new schedules will take effect. And at any developments that have followed this process, we will be sort of past AWS and on to this new scheduling model. So next slide, please. So getting specific about timelines, we have set 4 dates by which, each borough really can submit all of their schedules for confirmation, and then associated dates on which those schedules would take effect. So the first round of this had both Queens and Staten Island and Manhattan submit their schedules by March 7th. At this point, those are all confirmed. They're all in order. The HR team is working on getting them in the system, and they are all set to take effect in early April. Which is quite soon, and I'm very much looking forward to, and having spoken to the VPs, they too are looking forward to seeing how this plays out and being able to use their resources a little more flexibly. In the second round, we had the Bronx submit their schedules. That's still in the confirmation process, but it seems to be going smoothly. And as such, the Bronx is on track to convert by April 17th. And then the final borough, Brooklyn, my understanding is that about 80% of their sites have put forth schedules. Since we're submitting them, in one package to DMP, we haven't started processing those yet. But my sort of cautious hope is that we can get them in by April 4th, or as sort of a last ditch date, April 18th. And in either of those cases, we would see this new program take effect across all 5 boroughs by mid-May, Sunday, May 15th. So yeah, that is really where we are on this. Obviously, we've sort of been working through, initial hiccups with implementation, but all in all, I think this is going, quite well. And, both the borough staff and the property level staff that we've spoken to is quite excited to see this in place. So yes, I guess any questions on this program in particular before we move on?
I just have a comment, but I'm very happy to see the shifts, the traditional, the time shifting and the compressed, because that will address a lot of the concerns for the residents who don't want to miss work to get repairs done. I think it's a great idea, and thank you and the team and everyone who's responsible for making those changes. Now, the DMP, that is whom?
So that is within our central office operations group. That's the Department of Management and Planning. So Andrew Faubles' unit.
And that is people in your staff, in that department, in your staff.
So
There
that's
are no
not, what's
go ahead.
that?
There are no outsiders. This is all NYCHA people.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Okay. And the fact that you're coordinating with the Tenant Association president is a big plus. Because if anybody knows the problems out of development, it's definitely, besides the residents, is the guys that the person, a guy or girl that they go to as their leader. So he or she are apprised of what's really going on. All right. So now, oh, by the way, the other thing is the chronos.
Mhm.
The plan, the plan that you're talking about is the plan that you're going to implement for each development goes to, is entered in Chronos and not the other computer systems that you use in order to perform the everyday process?
So I guess there are systems like the ones we use to track work orders. Those are sort of I guess agnostic as to what the scheduling of the staff are. Kronos is really the only system that needs, I mean, at least in this case, to know each person's schedule, and then other systems draw from that as necessary.
And the last question I have on this is, and I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. All the site-based schedules are up to the development manager to choose? And
Yeah.
if so, can they, maybe if they see that that's not working, shift to another plan within that same calendar year?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that
Okay.
is something we wanted to make sure could happen explicitly under this program, so people can alter their schedules as new needs crop up.
Okay, those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Hey, Victor, if I could add, just to emphasize this last point that Kyle addressed, we want the sites to try out their schedules. If they don't work, try a different one. But I don't want us to be in the old NYCHA mode where I can't do anything about it. I can't change anything. So that's one thing we're going to keep an eye on. And the second thing is we wanted to make sure that each tenant association was contacted because we've obligated to do this kind of connection through the memorandum of agreement that we signed with the CCOP. So this is important for that reason, and it's important because we want these changes to work. And if I'm a manager and my initial schedule isn't what I hoped it would be, we would green light your to change, so you could try that. The behind the scenes thing that I want to emphasize is getting and making sure we can keep our staff levels up, because we have, for caretakers especially, we have so much turnover. And we're going to be working in the, to Arvin's point about HR, we're going to be working on that as well behind the scenes so that the support departments are in fact supporting what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I had one comment and question. I was going to save it to the end. This is Paula, but maybe it's more appropriate. And that is that I continue to worry about the development of the resident associations. I know that, we probably have some great resident associations, but we also have some that need help, need training, need inspiration. So it's not as much a question, but it's a statement that I think that should be a part of the transformation plan. And I believe it is. And I was just looking for it here.
Hey, Paula, we're going to be doing memorandum of agreement training with all the TAs.
Mhm.
And I believe as we go through that, HUD is providing the technical assistance funding for that. And that was something that started when Sherrod was still over on that side of the fence. But I think that training is going to yield a package of training to help develop tenant leadership.
Yeah,
So
that's great. And if there's anything I can do, I'm on the resident engagement committee. If there's anything I can do in that area, it's something I really care about and I really think offers potential.
Well, we could bring back some ideas for the resident engagement committee.
Great.
And I'm hopeful the purpose of the training that we're starting on is to train staff and residents on what the new memorandum of agreement means. And when we start to do that, it will become very clear that there are other things related to that, not just how we talk to each other, but also I think other needs will emerge. And I'm hopeful by summer, we would have a package of improvements that we could actually think about getting residents trained on as they take on leadership roles. And we will keep you advised, because I'm excited for that training and excited that we're training staff and residents in the same room as well.
Yeah, and it's just something I care about, so I want to offer my time and energy.
Okay. No, thank you.
Just to kind of follow up and give you a little background on that, Paula.
Yep.
Back in the late 90s and the early beginnings of the 2000s, when I became a tenant association president, there was a program in place that when you got in, there was someone assigned to go to the resident leaders and his board and teach them about the various things that they need to do. First of all, to stay within the rules, and second, to apply their own personal way of leadership that would be detrimental in the success of their particular association. And I got to tell you, more than not, became successful due to that training. I'm a beneficiary of it, and it was great. So I'm glad that
Great role model,
back to
Victor. You're a great role model. So we need to think about that for the future.
that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Eva?
Thank you. So I'm on the next slide. I'm going to talk about the work order reform project and give you an update on where we are in this implementation. Next slide. Just to reiterate again for you, the goals of the program are to reduce the amount of time it takes to complete an entire repair, reduce the number of missed appointments due to tenant at home. And this one I'm going to couch very carefully, that we want to reduce the backlog with efficiency. I just need to keep reiterating the expectation that this program will not get rid of our entire backlog. We really can't operationalize our way out of that backlog. We need capital improvements and more resources to get there. But what we do hope is that we are going to be able to address pieces of the backlog in an ad hoc manner through this program. And I'll explain more about that later in the presentation. Next slide. So work order reform, again, is the principle of a one call, so that once the maintenance worker is in the apartment with a resident, they will be setting the resident up to have a call to their neighborhood planner to schedule all the follow-up jobs that are needed, or repairs that are needed to finish that job. The idea here is that, you know, this will reduce the time in between that, because we are scheduling everything concurrently, and that the resident is able to see everything that's needed to take care of that repair, and NYCHA is seeing it the same way. And so this is a really important change for us culturally, because right now, before work order reform, we would see what has to happen next. The plumber needs to come and fix the pipe. And then once that happens, the plaster will come, and then the painter. But from the resident's perspective, they just see the hole in their wall. And so we really wanted to align the NYCHA view and employee view of the problem with the resident view of the problem, and create a solution that gets us there. And that's what that one call principle is. In order to achieve that, we decentralize the skilled trades down to the neighborhood and the development level in some cases. And that required a significant increase in resources over the course of the 21 and 22 budget. We're adding over 450 new staff. So this is a tremendous program, so it requires us to really launch and focus on one borough at a time. Next slide.
Before you move on, just
Yeah.
a little information. I think that there's one other thing that you might consider when moving forward that I think will help make this reform a success, and that is uniformity. Basically, what I mean is a repair is handled the same way in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Staten Island, and in Manhattan. There was issues in the past that one particular work order was done one way in Manhattan, done a different way in the Bronx, done yet a third way in Brooklyn. And so residents were kind of confused, especially when they're calling each other at different developments and saying, well, wait a minute, that's not what they said here. So we need that to have uniformity around the 5 boroughs whenever a repair is being addressed.
And that is our goal as well. And if we go on the next slide, I'll explain a little bit about how we're going to get there. And I talked a little bit about the history here, and I think you've seen this slide before, how we did the pilot in Western Queens, and we launched Queens Staten Island in November. And to your point, Board Member Gonzalez, what we're doing with each borough is learning and adjusting and pivoting as we go. So as Greg kind of mentioned, we don't want to get stuck into this is the program, no changing. Everything we're doing is iterative. So we launched in Queens Staten Island and we took a lot of learnings there into the Bronx. We launched Bronx on March 7th. That's the big update that I wanted to share with everyone. And then we're still on track to launch Brooklyn in June and Manhattan in September. And at each point, we have been working through an interim guidance that explains how the work orders should get done. And it's called interim guidance because with each borough, we're improving it, learning from how each borough does it, taking the best of all of that. So at the end of the rollout, which is the end of 2022, we will issue a final guidance that all boroughs need to align with. And so that everyone will be following the same procedures and proceeding with work orders in the same way. And so this year is really the learning year for everyone and getting all of this feedback together as we roll out the program. Next slide.
Right.
So again, this is how we're connecting residents to the neighborhood planner. The slip on the picture on the right is the repairs to schedule slip. So when the maintenance worker goes into the apartment, if they are not able to complete the repair, and I want to be clear that we are working right now with training to do additional training for all of our maintenance workers, because our goal is that we really do want the maintenance worker to complete the repair as much as possible. We're not trying to incentivize any sequencing to skilled trades, but we do know that that has to happen very often in our buildings due to our conditions. So when the maintenance worker is in the apartment, if they identify that this has to be a skilled trades project, they will identify all the trades that are needed to complete the repair. They will check it off on this slip and they hand the slip to the resident, and that has their neighborhood planner and the planner's secretary information. And then the resident will call the planner to schedule the repair when they will be home for it. And so that's another key part of this program, is that we are really hoping to increase or decrease the tenant not home and increase the resident at home in order to make sure that the jobs get done. And so because the resident now has someone to talk to, they have a single point of contact to schedule the repair. If they find out at some point they're not going to be home or something else came up, they can call back the planner or the secretary to reschedule. So we're hoping this is just a new line of communication that we've opened with our residents that has never existed before, true one-on-one contact in order to schedule the repairs. In addition, the planners, because we know residents may not, it may take a little while for them to understand this new process. We've done briefings in both Queens, Staten Island, and Bronx, and we're going to continue doing more. But the planners are also supposed to be going in every day and checking for open work orders for their neighborhood that have not yet been scheduled, and calling the resident and saying, your maintenance worker was there last week. You haven't called. Can I schedule these repairs for you? And here's where the backlog comes in. At the time the planner is on the phone with the resident, we've updated Maximo so you can see everything open in the apartment, all the work orders that are open. So the planner is going to look at everything that's pending for that apartment, not just what's on this slip, and say, I see you have an old electrical work order from last year. Do you want me to schedule that one for you? And that's what I mean by getting through the backlog in an efficient way, in an ad hoc way. We hope to start capturing that. We have also advised the planners to start looking through open work orders in their neighborhood for the oldest work orders. and start trying to capture some of the oldest work orders and schedule them when we can. We have already seen extremely high call volume to our planners, especially in the Bronx right after launching. And we know that planners are really busy. So we're seeing how this all works. The picture on the left side of the page is a new flyer that we're working on right now to get out to residents so they understand this process. We want them to understand from the beginning to end how to schedule a work order if they need a fix in their apartment. And we also want to reiterate that this process is about scheduling skilled trades. You still need to call the CCC to schedule that first maintenance worker visit, or the My NYCHA app, which we want to promote as well, a lot more of. So this is some of the communications that we're planning on releasing in the short term. Next slide. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on the program.
Paula,
Victor can go first.
Vice
No,
Chair.
no, I refer to the lady.
He's always so kind. So I have two, they're sort of overall general questions. One has to do with communications. And it's a little bit of a trigger from Victor's question about being at different stages in different places. One of the things I think we talked about was getting digital boards in all of the developments so that we could really improve the common communications that we want each of the developments to know about. And so I was curious about some of the new communications strategies for this year.
So I can't comment overall on our communications plan, but I do know that the digital boards is still something that we're working through. I know that IT is in the process of costing that out, but we just recently discussed that with the chair and COO, and it is something that we're still hoping. Oh, I see Patty is on the line. I didn't realize that. I'm happy to have her jump in and answer that as well.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so really I can just echo what Eva said. We actually just talked about this at our new tech steering committee last week with Greg and Sharad. And we have done some initial cost estimates. And what we talked about, I believe, is trying to come up with a reasonable number that we could do, I believe, starting with some of our senior developments. We're just looking, working with Anika on how to try to identify funding. As we all know, that's a challenge, but we definitely have an interest in doing this and having a phased rollout so that we would be able to use that as a standard method of communicating key information. The beauty of it is it could be at a citywide level, it could be at a borough level, it could be at a development level, or it could be at an individual building level. We just have to have the capacity to manage all of that information. So it's a significant investment, of course, because it's not just the hardware and software of getting it on there, but it's the people who are maintaining all of that on the back end through a web-based interface. But it's definitely something we're looking to leverage to standardize the information that we get out to everybody. So thank you for asking, and it's definitely on our radar.
And Paula, I'll just add on any of the transformation projects, especially these larger initiatives like property-based scheduling and work order reform, we do come up with a communication strategy for the program. And actually, Jacqueline, if you go to the page before, Mariella, you'll see on that flyer on the left, we have our transform banner. So we've been trying to do some branding around it to keep it consistent so that people identify this as part of the change movement. And so our communication strategy has always been a mix of flyers, emails, rent inserts to residents on the changes. So before the launch in Bronx, we had a rent insert just to the Bronx residents. In addition, we did resident association briefings, two resident association briefings in the Bronx, as well as just a general open resident town hall on work order reform. So we are trying all methods of communication in order to kind of figure out how to get it right. And for the for the employees, we did We actually went to every development in the Bronx and attended muster with the maintenance workers and the super and assistant super in order to talk through the program and answer their questions, get their feedback. And, it was really helpful. We keep an ongoing list of the things because, they are the frontline staff. They are the ones doing this. So they said, what about this? And what about that? And that's the kind of iterations that we're learning, even from Queens, Staten Island, who are in the apartments now doing this. They've said, you don't have this on your list. And so we're taking all of that feedback constantly in order to continue improving the program.
Yeah, I remember from the survey, the resident survey, that flyers are actually the most favorite way people get information. So, listening to them and as you say, always having your color scheme of the Transform NYCHA on everything, I think is very important. So that's great. My other question goes back to the very first slide, and that is, can you share why there's a need for a phase 2 on the federal? What was the thing that caused them to say we need more, or we need something that we lead? And I know that's a delicate question, but I wanted to ask it.
I think it was a recognition that, number one, there's a lot in the transformation plan. Arvin mentioned it, over 40 different projects, and we can't do everything at once. There has to be some phasing to all of these changes from a variety of reasons. Obviously, from a change management perspective, there's only so much any of us can handle change at any given time. We need to set the foundation with the operational changes and then move on to kind of second phase of that. So the idea was that we would have a first phase implementation plan that kind of details the priority and short-term initiatives. And then once we're through that, the second phase would kind of cover everything else. It would also, kind of talk to how we plan to sustain all of this improvement and make sure that it's really that we have a culture of continuous improvement, that we are continuing evaluating whether the programs are working. So it was really just about kind of breaking the workload into two to make sure that we were focusing on the first set of priorities now, and then going back and reevaluating in the second step.
But this phase 2 will be led by the federal oversight team. That's a difference.
That's a difference. And part of that was because we, honestly, we said that the working on the plan is really important, but it also takes a lot of work. And so we want to be able to shift our focus right now to the implementation of our projects. And then we can feed information back. So the actual just writing of the plan and the coordination of the documents that put together the plan would be done by the federal oversight partners, so that Arvin and I and our team can focus on running the project meetings and running the implementation of these programs.
And if I might
Good.
add, Board Member Gavin, this is the phase 2 plan is where Eva and I really are going to take the bones and the muscle that her and Arvin and her team worked on and start to do all of the connective work on. This is where the gray area has to be filled in, where Eva and I are translating everything that's written into an actual policy or plan, because a lot of what is in there takes a lot of kind of this I know what needs to happen, but now Eva has to help put it in words. And this is what allowing the federal oversight team to write the documents allows the symbiosis between Eva and I to actually create the sustainability part of the entire 3 documents, which is the organizational plan. This will be the critical juncture that allows it to actually take hold and last. So that's why it's good to have them writing the documents so we can start to coalesce and actually come together and create what we need to succeed.
Great. Got it. Thank you both and everyone. This is huge, and it's impressive and just exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Paula, I'm going to pile on in a good way, I hope. Behind the scenes of the work order reform is we're analyzing the entire business process of work orders, especially how do work orders get closed when there's no work done? And why are there legitimate reasons or not? And to Sharad's point, we're going to have rules around this, and they're going to be different than the rules we've had before. And, you know, our simple rule of thumb perhaps is you close the ticket, or you have tasks under the ticket doesn't close till all the work is completed. And so there is a bunch of stuff behind the work order reform itself in the way that we're going to treat this that I think is not is structurally important. And I think it touches on what Sharad just said about collaborating between strategy and innovations and operations on making it stick. So there's other work behind this that we didn't share, but I think really contributes to making the reform more powerful.
Again, thank you, everyone. You know, it's
Okay.
enormous. It's just enormous. And I think as we understand, and I think that's a good way to say it, it's almost not like implementation as much as sustainability or systemization. I mean, it's going from, I've implemented it, how do I make sure it's sticking? So in a way, it's not just another phase of implementation, it's sort of a solidifying phase.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're happy to take suggestions for how to name it.
But that I can do. I love to name things. I mean, it is a sustainability, except that would be confusing with normal sustainability, but it's a permanency plan.
Yeah, I like
All
that one.
right. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Board members, does anyone have additional
Yes,
questions? Vice Chair?
I had.
Mhm.
So first of all, I'd like to give kudos to, although it wasn't mentioned in the presentation, I thought I saw it in there. And, you know, in light of all these things in the news where NYCHA appears in their eyes as a negative a place, I am so glad that you guys are implementing the employee recognition program again. This would bring light and take a heavy burden off those that are working so hard to make it happen. And then all you ever see is NYCHA this, NYCHA that in the news. And it's good to uplift the spirits to know that their work and contribution is being noted. So thank you very much for implementing this new program, as well as within the work orders that if a repairman goes into, or repair person goes into an apartment for one thing and sees something else, that they will also attempt to repair that. Those are two major issues that I think are going to reform the thinking of those that are working very hard to make sure that NYCHA and this plan is successful. Having said that, I want to go back to something that Paula touched on when she said about being in the governance committee. In the neighborhood model, you mentioned that there's going to be new training and new initiatives for all the new roles in that are being, shall we say, implemented. So my question would be, does that include board members and their new roles on certain committees that were not there before?
So as part of our governance project, we always envisioned that we would be doing training for the board. I actually started working on a board training plan earlier or later 2021, and we are nearly there. We are actually holding until we have the vacant board positions filled, and then I hope to do a board training. The training would focus on general public housing issues, very specific NYCHA issues, and then working with the governance committee, we'd also talk about other items to add to the training program. But Greg and I had talked about making, like a mini curriculum of training for the board, and that is something that is still on our list.
Excellent. Now, in page 205, where you talked about the PLI, which is where I think I read the thing about the employee recognition program. There are 3 sites that you mentioned with regards to storerooms. Are those the only 3 sites that we have in NYCHA, or are these new ones that are being added to the already established storage rooms?
Thank you. I actually see that Shin Kim from procurement is on, and I don't know if you want to take this question. If not, I would have to get back to you to confirm the storeroom, where all the storerooms are.
Okay. Okay. And now, in
I
regard
think it was
to
Sergio.
hello.
Is Sergio on?
Yeah, so in regards to the update, it was the recognition for those particular storeroom caretakers, but there is a storeroom in each, and obviously in each of the development areas. We are continuing to optimize those storerooms, and in fact, there's a plumbing optimization that's occurring right now at the direction of COO Sherrod. We're continuing to update that, but we did want to highlight the excellent work that is going on by the caretakers in managing those storeroom facilities. Does that help answer your question, sir?
I mean, it helps because now then it created yet another question, because I was under the impression that the storage rooms that you're talking about are the storage rooms where when there's a part missing or anything, where the management office or their storage manager will contact or email or put something in the system to receive that part in order to complete the work repair.
That is exactly right. We're aligning the needs of the work orders to be better aligned with the supplies that are on hand, and not only looking at the supplies at the storerooms, but then potentially even providing supplies at the building level to facilitate the operations of the caretakers to and from different locations on site.
So then when we talk about storage room, now we're talking about two different levels. We're talking about the storage room at the local development, and then the storage room where we keep the other parts that they normally don't have the part and have to send away for it.
Right. You know,
Now-
again, look, I'm sorry, sir.
Well, what I was going to complete is the following, that because I do remember that there was a time where we had to have the part number, the size, the company, the whole kit and caboodle about one piece of equipment when needed, and it was cataloged in somewhere in the books. Somewhere in the books it was cataloged, and this information was sent to a major storage area where all these parts were kept, so that anytime a development had an issue and there was a part missing that the local development didn't have, they would go to that. So are those storage rooms different from the ones we're speaking of now? And if so, how many of those other ones do we have still in place?
So we're still talking about the same ones within the developments.
Right.
I will say that we are now starting to look at strategic supplies at the borough levels.
Okay.
And then obviously optimizing our space at LIC. And then thirdly, you know, moving to a more dynamic vendor managed inventory approach as well, and aligning all of that. You mentioned something that I think is very important as it relates to this, which is that that idea of housing numbers or HA numbers or whatnot. That is very much a challenge within our systems, and we're moving away from that to a standard nomenclature and approach towards managing the description of items that align with universally with our vendors. And as you saw earlier today with a number of the catalog contracts that were initiated, mostly in IT, and then the prior board meeting with office supplies, we will be moving more and more of that cataloging into the Oracle environment and punching out and being able to integrate those vendor catalogs with work orders and facilitating the timing. Now, we will identify those supplies that are critical to be on hand, in particular, if they're going to be utilized within a 30-day period, to be close at hand. And then as that stretches from an element of need in the supply chain, it could go all the way to having a vendor managed inventory, so that we're not really holding those supplies in our books. It creates a level of efficiency relative to cost, as well as maintaining those assets within our facilities.
I'm using local vernacular. That's the ticket. That's the ticket. That's where we gotta go. All right, thank
Lot
you.
going on there. Thank you.
Yeah,
sir.
Victor, thank you, because this is examples of building out the front-facing work order reforms and then the back end to keep things moving. I do want to say, Sergio and I have talked extensively. I really appreciate his approach to procurement because it's opening us up in a way I think we have not been as open before. Inside the rules we have, we're going to have more choices. It's going to be easier to shop and obtain things. And we're going to have more access to vendors when we need those vendors, whether it's a service, whether it's an emergency, whether it's a part. I think over time, that's just simply going to be a much more developed and very supportive of getting the work done more timely.
Yes. And now there was a part that I didn't quite understand, maybe because of the lettering, I guess. Something about the RFQ template. What is it? Because I know RFP is when you send something out to be, what is the RFQ template?
Is it RFQ or PQL template?
It says it's in page 2 of 5. It says something about the RFQ template.
In what
If you
context?
go back to page 2 of 5.
I don't have it in front of me. I didn't expect this question, so I apologize, board member.
I think Vice Chair Gonzalez is one of the few people who've read all of our implementation plan.
And that's why he's vice chair.
Exactly.
Right. Overachiever, overachiever.
Sergio, we can get you that text
If
again.
you turn to page 2 of 5, I think you'll see where I'm asking the question there.
Yeah, can we do that?
Can we see that online? But I will speak, generally speaking, to the way that we're looking to template, all of our operations with regards to procurement, our ability then to train, because that's really our developments in many cases don't know how to even utilize the existing resources that we're developing. So, by getting standardization to these tools, really enables them to be, more proactive and being able to meet the needs of the residents immediately, as opposed to looking for, a centralized sort of, solution to that effect. But as I understand RFQs, and I apologize, it's my procurement hat, but usually that's a request for quote. But I don't know beyond that. But even that is a matter of standardization that we need from the various different functions that the developments may have in order when they're sourcing, so that by having that standardization, we're more effectively able to communicate with the vendors, get better pricing, manage performance, and again, our business, becomes more and more standardized. So and Eva use those words, continuous improvement that we can measure, over and over again.
Okay.
Eva, I don't know if that was
Okay.
in context of RFQ, I'm hoping.
Mariella, can you please bring up the page that's Vice
I
Chair
was
is-
just looking for it. I'm not sure which of the documents.
Yeah, because the last page I have is 204, so
Correct.
I'm a bit confused.
I think it's on the PowerPoint, actually. If you go back to slide 5, I think it's the second of the 5 slides on the
Right
milestones.
there.
Yeah.
Right
Okay.
there.
It's
Now.
halfway down in the middle on MWB.
Okay, right. Okay, so I thought it was in the
Pre-qualified list.
PQL.
Yeah, it was
That's a
right.
big lift. That's a big lift, and it's a significant amount of flexibility that the agency has with respect to the CFR in pre-qualifying vendors. We've actually established, this will be in our next newsletter, we've actually established our first PQL as an agency and CCTV as we learn all the various documents in order to do pre-qualification. And it's not, there's a lot of notification that you have to do in regards to the public and the vendor community, and make sure that you continue to have a fair and competitive process as you're qualifying, and then as you're then RFQing or request for quotes template off of that qualifications list. I will say that also when it comes to pre-qual, it will drive down to the MWBE level. So a PQL will be able to identify not only MWB, but actually Section 3 as well. We have a Section 3 first, MWBE, and then open competitive. But those two functions, the PQL and then the way to utilize that pre-qualified list using the request for quote template is really what we're speaking of in that particular item. But the use of PQLs is going to drive all the way through to even our larger projects in capital and A&E, CM services and whatnot. It's a heavy lift that we've been doing in procurement in concert with law to really, bring the agency to a different operating model in working with our vendors.
I really appreciate Sergio's work here, because we will be able to have a pool of qualified MBEs or WBEs or Section 3, and you'd be able to get a quote from one of those pre-qualified folks without having to do a whole new procurement necessarily. So over time, again, access to the vendor is changed because we've done a lot of this work at the front end, and we can target specific groups that we're intended to focus on by law or because it's a good business practice.
But one other thing, and I'm hoping that this too will make our RFPs more attractive in order to get more, or shall we say, new blood into the game. So, because it's okay to use the people that do the work for us and, that have constantly been good to nature. But I think there should be some room for some new kids on the block to come in and give us a new perspective on things.
Yeah, to that statement, board member, it's in many cases it's difficult for vendors, with only a 20-day or a 30-day window, even when we put something on the street, to be able to respond. Or there might be a preconception that some vendors are already in mind, which is never the case. But that's just sometimes how the vendor community might perceive things. Using the PQL, where there is an ongoing process for qualifying, for being able to work with vendors as to what's in the pipeline, having that open dialogue for when an RFQ is released to that pre-qualified list, should increase the number of players within our solicitations, because we're not narrowing every single time the participants to a 20 or 30-day window for them to participate. It'll be much more broad, and frankly, much of the legal, so to speak, will be done on the front end as opposed to the back end. So that it will be definitely facilitated to that point.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for actually, trying to make NYCHA, again, to use a military vernacular, all that it can be. Thank you very much. That's my.
Okay, if there are no additional questions or comments, thank you all the presenters, all the board members, such thoughtful questions, and for all of those others who contributed. I recall Patty, Sergio, and the COO Sherrod. So thanks again. Chair, being that all matters before the board this afternoon have been addressed, may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Board
Motion.
member. Thank you, Chair. Seconded. Vice Chair? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
And none opposed. Thank you. The recorded end time is 2:30 p.m. Thanks again. The next NYCHA board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, April 27th, 2022 at 10 a.m. Everyone stay safe and thanks again.
Thank you so much.